Judy Ferguson is the Provincial Auditor. In your report, Judy, you were talking about billing and what physicians do. Explain some of the concerns you have around that.
Sure. What we did is we actually looked at the processes that the Ministry of Health uses when they're paying physicians under the fee-for-service arrangement. In Saskatchewan, there's two main arrangements. One is fee-for-service, and the province pays about $500 million each year to about 1,800 physicians under that arrangement. And then there's one that's a contracted one. So our focus was fee-for-service. And what we found is really the ministry needs to do more, really on two areas: on the front end before it pays physicians, and on the back end. So on the front end, what we found is that it's using an old system. It's about a 50-year-old IT system that wasn't designed to handle the volume of payments and the types of payments that are going out for physician fee-for-service billings. And so what's happening is that under the current system, it can only handle simple edits, and so to augment that, the ministry is using these labor-intensive manual assessments. It processes about 12 million billings each year on a biweekly basis. It's getting those payments out. It's doing about 8,200 manual assessments every 2 weeks. We found that staff they're going through that. They're doing their best to identify questionable billings and making adjustments, but our work found that they're not catching everything. So they need to do better in terms of beefing it up, looking at their options for a better IT system so that they can do a better job of identifying questionable billings so they're not overpaying. On the backside, we found that there wasn't enough investigations happening. Although the ministry is identifying cases of suspected overpayments and overbilling, and they're not all being investigated. For example, in last year it identified 15 physicians and it only referred 9 to a committee that's tasked with investigating physicians' billing practices. Why 9? Well, that's how many times the committee happens to meet. Over and above that, it can investigate on its own, but its investigations authority is limited to individual billings, like that individual biweekly. So when it does that, if it finds something, it has to get the agreement of the physician that in fact there was an error and to recover it. So it's cumbersome. So again, what we're doing is we're calling for it to look at more options to do investigations to where it suspects it may have overpaid physicians.
In terms of doing better, your report also highlights pipeline safety, something that certainly got a lot of people's attention last summer when we saw that Husky oil spill. What could the government be doing better?
Well, we did an audit 5 years ago, and we went back in to look to see where they're at. We found that they've implemented 2 of 5 recommendations that were outstanding. The 2 recommendations are important. It's the strengthening of really the regulatory regime for pipelines, and that's the changes in legislation that just went through the Assembly there. They broadened it to include flow lines, which is one thing that we'd asked them to look at and consider. We're happy about that. They've strengthened the fact that the operators are responsible for abandoned pipelines, which is good again too, and gave them some flexibility in that administration. It's the other side that we're disappointed. We expected that they would have rules and procedures in place to take a risk-based approach to their monitoring. What we found is that they're not there yet. 5 years later, they're still not there yet. They don't have those rules and procedures. They have done some things, but it's relatively ad hoc. They have inspected some waterways, etc. But we expect a risk-based approach. They've gathered some information, but they don't have all the information. So they're just not quite there.
When it comes to our provincial highways, anyone who has driven on them knows there's some spots that need attention, and you highlighted an interesting component of that, and that being vehicles that are overweight or oversized. What are the consequences of not properly monitoring the weight of vehicles on our provincial highways?
First off, you have to recognize highways and transportation, our highways and infrastructure, they're responsible for regulating the weights and dimension of vehicles, and they do have a good regime where they set up what rules are responsible there. Why? Well, an overweight vehicle, it takes longer to stop than a normal vehicle, right? And also that additional weight can cause damage to the highway infrastructure if it's not carefully managed. Over dimension, if you think about that one where the guy's driving down the highway, hits the overpass, right? It's, it can hit the infrastructure. Again, it can obstruct views in terms of passing, etc. So it's important that it's regulated.
Thanks for your time today, Judy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.